The owner of the penthouse didn't know her name. He only knew that when she came in, the air changed. She was young, quiet, disciplined, but there was a storm behind her restrained gaze. He approached carefully and said, "May I take off your uniform?" Like someone asking for permission to feel. If you like love and romance stories, watch until the end and you won't regret it. Subscribe to this channel and leave a comment saying where you're listening to this beautiful story from. Let's continue. The sun was hiding behind the glass and concrete skyscrapers of the Upper East Side when Henry Harrison parked his Aston Martin in the building's private garage. It was a Tuesday like any other. Endless meetings, million-dollar decisions, financial reports, and the persistent feeling that, despite all he had conquered, something was still missing. The doorman, accustomed to the almost irritating punctuality of the penthouse resident, nodded respectfully as Henry passed through the lobby without returning the gesture. The elevator doors closed and the numbers began to climb, just as his life had, an upward, calculated, and relentless trajectory. At 47, Henry bore the appearance that money and power provided, well-cut brown hair with silver strands at the temples that gave him a distinguished air, broad shoulders maintained by a private gym routine 3 times a week, and green eyes that no longer registered surprise at almost anything. His angular face, with a beard always trimmed to the exact length, completed the image of a man who knew what he wanted and how to get it. His empire, Harrison Technologies, had become one of the largest tech companies in the United States after 2 decades of precise decisions, strategic acquisitions, and an administrative coldness that had become legendary in the market. The elevator opened directly into the penthouse foyer, 5,000 square feet of luxury, isolation and loneliness, meticulously decorated by some European-named architect who charged more for his accent than for his talent. Henry loosened his Italian silk tie and walked to the black marble bar, pouring himself an 18-year-old scotch. The first drink of the day, always at 7:20 in the evening, never before, never after. It was then he noticed something was different. A faint scent of cleaning products hung in the air, but there was another smell mixed in, subtle like lavender and something he couldn't identify. He then remembered it was Tuesday, the day of the deep clean. The third-party company was supposed to have finished at 5, but apparently there had been a delay. Henry detested unforeseen events. His apartment, like his life, was governed by inflexible schedules and protocols. He walked toward the library, the room he considered the heart of that impersonal residence. There he kept rare editions, first impressions, and old books he collected not for a passion for literature, but as tangible investments. They were the only assets he had inherited from his father, not out of generosity, but because Augustus Harrison had simply forgotten them in his will. He stopped at the threshold when he saw her. She was turned away from him, standing on a small stepladder, reaching for a higher shelf. Her simple grey uniform contrasted with the richness of the leather-bound volumes. What caught his attention, however, was not her unexpected presence, but the way her fingers slid along the spines of the books, with an almost reverent care, as if touching something precious. It was not the mechanical gesture of someone merely cleaning, but the touch of someone who appreciates, respects, understands. "You're still here," he said, causing her to turn around quickly. Clara Vellini almost lost her balance on the small ladder. She hadn't expected to see the owner of the apartment so early. According to the schedule the company had provided, he was only supposed to arrive after 10 at night, as he did every Tuesday. "I'm sorry, Mr. Harrison," she replied, carefully descending the steps. "There was an issue with the team today. I'm just finishing up now and I'll be on my way." Henry observed her more closely. She must have been around 25. Dark brown hair pulled back in a simple bun, light olive skin, large dark eyes framed by long lashes. She wore no makeup, save for a discreet lipstick. There was a dignity in the way she carried herself, spine straight, chin slightly lifted, gaze direct. That didn't match the standard issue uniform or the hands. Slightly rough from daily work with chemicals. "Are you new?" "I don't recall seeing you before," he asked, sipping his scotch, watching her through the amber liquid. "I've been with the company for 8 months, sir, but I usually come with the full team and we finish before you arrive," she explained, starting to pack her supplies into her case. "My name is Clara Vellini." "Vellini," he repeated, feeling the foreign name roll off his tongue. "Italian?" My paternal grandfather was from Naples, she answered simply, avoiding prolonging the conversation. Henry was not used to this kind of interaction. The people who circulated through his life followed a predictable pattern. Employees who feared him, executives who flattered him, occasional lovers who feigned interest beyond the financial. Clara showed none of this. There was no fear in her eyes, nor the exaggerated subservience he was used to seeing in junior staff, nor any sign that she saw him as anything other than a temporary obstacle to finishing her work and leaving. "You like books," he stated. Not as a question, but as an observation. Clara hesitated for a moment, as if weighing how much she should reveal. "Yes, sir. What were you looking at so intently?" "I saw how you touched that shelf." She seemed uncomfortable. "I apologize if it seemed improper. I'm not accusing you of anything," Henry interrupted, intrigued by her immediate defensiveness. "I'm genuinely curious. That shelf has mostly first editions of American literature from the 1930s. Her eyes lit up for a second before she could control her reaction. "I saw the first edition of The Sound and the Fury by William Faulkner. It's impressive to have it in a private collection." Henry raised his eyebrows, surprised. Most people wouldn't even know who William Faulkner was, let alone recognize a first edition of his work. "Did you study literature?" A sad, almost imperceptible smile crossed Clara's lips. "No, sir. I just like to read." She closed her case with a soft click. "If you'll excuse me, I'm finished for today." Henry watched as she walked toward the door, her steps silent on the marble floor, as if she had trained herself not to be noticed. There was something about her, a quiet dignity, an invisible wall that piqued his curiosity. In a world where people sold themselves so easily, Clara seemed to guard something precious that was not for sale. "Until next week." "Then," he said on an impulse even he didn't understand. She just nodded and left, leaving behind only the faint scent of lavender and the echo of a presence that seemed to linger even after her physical departure. That night, Henry slept poorly. He dreamed of books and a woman's hands touching them with care. He woke up irritated with himself for letting an anonymous cleaning lady occupy so much of his thoughts. He decided it was just fatigue, the chronic loneliness, or perhaps the second scotch he had taken against his own protocols. The following week, he changed his schedule to arrive home earlier on Tuesday. He told himself it was just to check if the service was being done properly. When he entered the apartment at 5 in the afternoon, he found the cleaning team finishing up. There were 3 women in the same grey uniform, but his eyes searched for only one. Clara was on the balcony, cleaning the glass doors. She worked with a silent efficiency, almost like a methodical, musicless dance. "Good afternoon," he said, watching as she turned without showing surprise. "Good afternoon, Mr. Harrison," she replied, formal. He noticed the other 2 employees looking at him with a mixture of fear and curiosity. Clara, however, maintained the same composed expression, as if he were just another piece of furniture to be cleaned. In the days that followed, Henry found himself thinking of her at random moments during important meetings, while signing million-dollar contracts, or on the rare occasions he dined with other executives. The image of Clara touching his books with that almost religious reverence returned like an insistent film. It wasn't sexual desire he felt, though she was undoubtedly beautiful in a discreet, unadorned way. It was something more unsettling, the sense that she saw the world through a lens completely different from his own. A month later, Henry had permanently altered his Tuesday schedule. He always arrived in the middle of the afternoon, inventing excuses to remain in the apartment while the cleaning team worked. He created small situations to interact with Clara, a book forgotten in the wrong place, a question about how to properly clean a certain surface, a casual comment about the weather. She always responded with professional politeness, but never extended the conversations, never showed the desire to please that he was accustomed to seeing in people. Clara Vellini had grown up in the outer boroughs of New York, the daughter of a housekeeper who had died when she was only 8. Her father, an Italian man who had never really been part of her life, had disappeared years earlier, leaving only his surname and fragmented stories about a man who had worked for a large company and been unjustly fired. After her mother's death, Clara went through 3 different shelters and 2 foster families. In each place, she learned to become invisible. It was the best way to survive. The less attention she drew, the less vulnerable she would be. At 16, she got a job as an assistant in a public library. It was there she found her true refuge. In books, she discovered worlds where people like her could dream, transform, transcend their circumstances. She read everything she could, studied on her own after her shift, and saved every penny for a day when perhaps she could go to college. She even got accepted into the literature program at Columbia. But life had other plans. When the library suffered budget cuts and she lost her job, the need for survival spoke louder than academic dreams. She found work with a cleaning company that serviced high-end offices and residences. The pay was better, and Clara was too competent to be let go. Over time, she was assigned to the most demanding clients, those who complained about the slightest imperfection. That was how she ended up at the penthouse of Henry Harrison, the businessman her colleagues feared and avoided. Clara did not fear him. In fact, she felt nothing specific for him. He was just another of the privileged people she worked for. She observed him as she observed everyone, with analytical distance, cataloging behaviors, trying to understand what moved people so different from her. She noted how he kept everything in obsessive order, how he always drank the same scotch at the same time, how his suits were impeccable, but his eyes seemed empty. What bothered her in recent weeks was the change in his routine. He had started showing up during her shift, asking questions, watching her when he thought she wouldn't notice. Clara knew this type of behavior. It wouldn't be the first time an employer had taken an interest in a female employee. The difference was that Henry Harrison didn't act like the others. There were no clumsy pickup lines, accidental touches, or crude innuendos. He seemed genuinely curious about her, as if Clara were a book in a foreign language he was trying to decipher. On one of these Tuesdays, Clara found a book on the coffee table, The Grapes of Wrath by Steinbeck. It was open to the very page describing how a character saw the world around him with the eyes of someone who had always been on the margins. It was impossible not to see the subliminal message. Henry was trying to establish some kind of connection through literature. Clara closed the book without showing any reaction and continued her work. Later, while cleaning his office, she found other American literature books strategically scattered about. Virginia Woolf, F. Scott Fitzgerald, Ernest Hemingway. Authors who wrote about social chasms, about invisible people, about worlds that do not touch. It was that same afternoon that the incident occurred. Clara was finishing cleaning the office when Henry entered without warning. She had just picked up a picture frame from the desk, the only personal photograph in the entire apartment. It showed a younger Henry next to another man, both holding champagne flutes. The other man had the same angular jaw, the same piercing eyes, but his smile seemed more genuine. "My brother Richard," Henry said, making her almost drop the frame. "He died 12 years ago. Car accident." Clara carefully placed the object back on the desk. "I'm very sorry, sir." Henry approached and picked up the frame, looking at the image with an expression Clara had never seen on his face, raw, almost painful vulnerability. "He was the only one who really knew me," he continued, as if talking to himself. "The only one who wasn't afraid to tell me when I was being an idiot." Clara remained silent, uncomfortable with the sudden intimacy. Henry seemed to notice and placed the photograph back on the desk. "Do you have siblings, Clara?" he asked, using her first name for the first time. "No, sir." "I'm an only child. Family in New York." "I don't have family," she replied simply, without self-pity. Henry's eyes fixed on hers for a moment too long. "Everyone has someone. Not everyone. Mr. Harrison, some people only have themselves." She returned to cleaning the desk, signaling that the conversation was over. Henry watched her precise movements, the economy of her gestures, the posture that never fully bent. Something inside him, a part that had been silenced for years since Richard's death, wanted to break through that invisible barrier Clara erected around herself. "Would you like to borrow some books?" he asked suddenly. "I have many that are just collecting dust." Clara stopped what she was doing and faced him, suspicious. "That wouldn't be appropriate, sir." "Why not?" "They're just books. Because there are boundaries between employer and employee, and personal loans cross that line." Her voice was firm, unwavering. Henry smiled, a rare and genuine smile. "You're the first person in years who has said no to me so directly." "Perhaps you need to spend time with people who don't depend on your money or approval," she replied. and immediately regretted her boldness. Instead of being offended, Henry laughed, a short, hoarse sound, as if his throat wasn't used to producing it. "You're right, Clara Vellini. Perhaps that's exactly what I need." When she left that afternoon, carrying her case of supplies, Henry watched from the balcony. There was something in Clara's silhouette that intrigued him. A contained strength, a silent mystery, a dignity that no company uniform could diminish. The following week, when Clara arrived for work, she found a package on the kitchen counter with her name on it. Inside was a new copy of Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf. There was no note, no inscription, just the book, and next to it a gift card to a well-known bookstore for $100. Clara looked at the package for a long time, feeling a mix of contradictory emotions. Part of her wanted to accept the gift, not for its monetary value, but because it had been years since she had experienced a genuine gesture of kindness. Another part, however, the one that had survived so many disappointments, whispered warnings. Rich people didn't give gifts without expecting something in return. When Henry arrived that afternoon, he found the package untouched in the same spot, with a note written in small, precise handwriting. "I appreciate the kindness, but I cannot accept. CV." It was the first time Clara saw genuine disappointment in Henry Harrison's eyes. It wasn't the reaction of someone thwarted in their whims, but the sincere sadness of an extended hand that was not taken. "Why?" he asked simply, holding the note. "Because I don't know what it means," she answered honestly. "And because I can't reciprocate. Not all gifts require reciprocation, Clara. In my experience, Mr. Harrison, they all do. Only the price varies." The statement hung between them like a heavy cloud. There was a history behind those words, a story of betrayals and distrust that Henry wanted to know but knew he had no right to ask. "I understand," he said finally. "I'm sorry if I offended you. You didn't offend me. We just have different worldviews." The atmosphere between them changed after that day. There was a mutual respect, a tacit understanding that they both carried invisible scars. Henry stopped creating artificial situations to interact with her, but when they did meet, there was a genuine cordiality. Occasionally he would ask about the book she was reading, and Clara would answer without elaborating much. Small conversations about American literature, about the weather, about the increasingly chaotic city. And then, the storm came. It was one of those summer downpours that turn New York City into liquid chaos. Clara had finished her shift later than usual because one of her colleagues had been absent. Just as she was about to leave, the heavens opened up. The rain beat violently against the windows, while lightning illuminated the prematurely darkened sky. The forecast on her phone indicated a severe thunderstorm, with flood and landslide warnings in various parts of the city. Henry found her in the foyer, looking worriedly out the window. "You shouldn't go out in this weather," he commented, approaching. "The streets must be flooded by now." "I have to go," she replied, though her expression betrayed her concern. "I live far away and the last bus leaves at 9. "Where do you live?" "The Bronx," she answered, mentioning a borough almost 2 hours away. Henry frowned. "Impossible to get there in this rain. Half the city must be underwater by now." As if to confirm his words, Clara's phone buzzed with a notification from the Office of Emergency Management, a severe flooding alert on several major routes, including the one she would need to take to get home. "Stay," Henry said, not as an order but as a suggestion. "I have a guest room that's never used. When the storm passes tomorrow, you can go home." Clara hesitated, visibly uncomfortable. The proposal made logistical sense, but crossed every boundary she had carefully established. "It wouldn't be appropriate, Mr. Harrison. It would be more inappropriate for you to risk yourself in this storm. They're predicting record flooding." He kept his distance, respecting her personal space. No strings attached, no expectations. Just a safe place to spend the night. At that moment, a particularly loud clap of thunder shook the windows, and the lights flickered. Seconds later, the power went out completely, leaving them in near darkness. "It seems the decision has been made for us," Henry commented, trying to ease the tension. In the dark, with only the intermittent flash of lightning illuminating her face, Clara seemed even more vulnerable and paradoxically stronger. The rain continued to punish the windows, creating a liquid curtain that isolated the apartment from the rest of the world. "I have flashlights and candles," he continued pragmatically, "and the stove is gas. We can improvise something for dinner. Clara finally nodded, acknowledging she didn't have much choice. All right. Thank you. The storm that began that night, not just the one falling over New York, but the one forming between them, would change the course of their lives in ways neither could have foreseen. For now they were just two people isolated by the rain, trying to find light in the sudden darkness, each carrying their own secrets, fears, and unfulfilled hopes. While Henry searched for candles in the kitchen, Clara remained motionless in the foyer, listening to the furious sound of water against the glass windows, feeling that something fundamental was about to change in her life. And for the first time in years, she didn't know whether she should fear or embrace that change. Henry Harrison's kitchen was like the man himself, sleek, functional, and rarely used to its full potential. Clara watched as he strategically lit candles around the room, creating a play of shadows and light that transformed the cold apartment into something almost welcoming. The storm raged on outside, merciless, while inside the apartment a delicate silence settled, broken only by the sound of the rain and the occasional thunder that made the windows vibrate. "You must be hungry," Henry commented, opening the stainless steel refrigerator. "I don't usually cook, but I have some frozen delivery options." "I can make something," Clara offered, feeling uncomfortable being treated as a guest. "It's the least I can do since I'm invading your home." "You're not invading." "You were invited," he corrected, but nodded. "Be my guest. The kitchen is all yours." Clara began to explore the cabinets and refrigerator. For someone who claimed not to cook, Henry had a surprisingly well-stocked pantry. Imported ingredients, expensive spices, chef-grade utensils that looked like they had never been used. She found fresh pasta, tomatoes, basil, and other basic ingredients. With the silent efficiency that characterized all her movements, she began to prepare a simple pasta sauce. Henry watched her discreetly as he opened a bottle of red wine. Clara moved around the kitchen as if she were dancing, precise gestures, no wasted motion. It was the same care he had noticed when she arranged his books, as if every object, no matter how simple, deserved attention and respect. "You cook well," he commented after a few minutes. "I learned early," she replied without taking her attention off the tomatoes she was dicing. "My mother worked all day. I had to make dinner when I got home from school." "How old were you?" "I started at 9. After she died, I cooked in the shelters too. It was a way to feel useful." There was a simplicity in the way Clara spoke of her difficult life. No self-pity, no drama, just facts presented with the same economy of words that characterized everything she did. Henry felt a lump in his throat. At 9 years old, he had nannies, cooks, and chauffeurs at his disposal. His father, Augustus Harrison, was already a successful businessman building the empire that Henry would eventually inherit and expand. Worlds so different they seemed to orbit different suns. "Would you like a glass of wine?" he offered, showing her the bottle. Clara hesitated, as she always did when the lines between employee and guest blurred. "Just a little, thank you." He poured her a glass and handed it to her, taking care not to touch her fingers in the process. Even in this small gesture, he respected the personal space she so clearly valued. The improvised dinner was surprisingly pleasant. They ate by candlelight at the kitchen island, sitting on high stools with the glistening wet city as a backdrop through the panoramic windows. The rain had subsided a little, but the city lights flickered as entire neighborhoods suffered power outages. "How did you end up working for the cleaning company?" Henry asked after a period of comfortable silence. Clara swirled the wine in her glass, watching the red liquid in the flickering candlelight. "It was the job I could get when the public library where I worked had its budget cut. That pays better than many other options for someone without a college degree." "You seem too intelligent for that kind of work," he commented, and immediately regretted it when he saw her stiffen. "There's no such thing as undignified work, Mr. Harrison. Only people who treat workers with indignity." The response was firm, and Henry realized his mistake. "You're absolutely right. I misspoke. What I meant was, you seem to have the potential for any career you chose." Clara relaxed a little. "I wanted to study literature at Columbia. I even got in, but I couldn't accept the spot. I needed to work full-time to survive. You could still do it. There are scholarships, loans." "Life doesn't always follow the path we plan," she interrupted gently. "And not everyone is born with the same opportunities." There was no bitterness in her voice, just a realistic resignation that hit Henry like a punch to the gut. He had never had to fight for anything in his life. Every door had opened automatically for the son of Augustus Harrison, the heir to the family fortune. His only real struggle had been to prove to his father that he could be just as ruthless in business, a quest that eventually consumed his humanity, turning him into a younger, even colder version of Augustus himself. "Do you like what you do?" he asked after another silence. Clara looked him directly in the eye, something she rarely did. "I like the feeling of transforming spaces, of entering a disordered place and leaving it clean, organized, ready to be lived in. It's honest work that makes a concrete difference in people's lives." Henry realized she wasn't being diplomatic. Clara truly found dignity in her work, a dignity he himself had lost in his luxury offices, signing million-dollar contracts that meant nothing more than extra zeros in his bank account. "I envy that," he admitted, surprised by his own honesty. "What?" "Your ability to find meaning in what you do. I've built an empire and I don't know why or for what." It was the first time Clara saw genuine vulnerability in this man, who always seemed so self-assured. For a brief instant, she glimpsed the little boy he must have once been, perhaps scared, perhaps lonely, despite all the material wealth. "It's never too late to find purpose," she said simply. The conversation flowed surprisingly easily after that. They talked about books. Clara revealed herself to be a voracious and insightful reader, capable of discussing everything from American literary classics to philosophy and contemporary poetry. Henry told her about his days in business school before his father's empire swallowed him whole. Without realizing it, they emptied the bottle of wine and he opened a second. The atmosphere had changed. The once cold and impersonal apartment seemed cozy under the candlelight. The social barriers that separated them seemed less insurmountable, though still present. Clara visibly relaxed, allowing herself to smile more, to gesture as she spoke of her favorite books, to reveal fragments of her personality that she kept carefully hidden during work. Henry watched her, fascinated. She was so different from the women he usually associated with, self-interested socialites, ambitious executives, models who saw him only as a means to advance their careers. Clara wanted nothing from him. There was no hidden agenda in her sincere eyes. It was then that he noticed the scar, thin, silvery in the candlelight, running down her right forearm. Clara saw his gaze and automatically pulled down the sleeve of her uniform to cover it. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "I didn't mean to be intrusive." "It's okay," she replied after a moment. "It's just a reminder of difficult times. Do you want to talk about it?" Clara was silent for a long moment, as if pondering whether or not to share that part of her story. Finally, she took a deep breath. "When I was 16, I lived with a foster family. The father, he drank a lot. One night, he tried to come into my room. I defended myself with a pair of scissors. He got furious, pushed me against a glass bookshelf." She spoke with an almost clinical calm, as if telling someone else's story. "After that, I went back to the shelter. That's when I decided I would never be in a vulnerable position again, that I would never depend on anyone." Henry felt a wave of primal anger build in his chest. He wanted to ask for the man's name, briefly fantasized about using his power and influence to completely destroy him. But he knew that wasn't what Clara needed or wanted. "I'm so sorry," he said simply, because there were no adequate words. "Don't be. It was a long time ago, and it made me who I am today." He nodded, respecting her resilience. "Thank you for trusting me enough to share that." Clara shrugged, but there was a slight tremor in her lips. "It must be the wine. I don't usually talk about my past. Or maybe it's the storm," he suggested. "There's something about storms that makes people feel more honest." As if in response, a particularly loud clap of thunder shook the building, making the candle flames flicker. Clara looked toward the window, at the drenched city stretching out as far as the eye could see. "Have you ever felt completely alone, even when surrounded by people?" she asked suddenly. "Every day," Henry answered without hesitation. Their gazes met, and something silent was communicated, a mutual recognition of solitudes that, though born of completely different circumstances, were equally profound. Henry got up to get more wine, and upon returning, he noticed Clara had moved to the enormous living room window, watching the storm. Her profile against the illuminated city was ethereal, almost like an apparition. He approached slowly, respecting the space between them. "You know what's strange?" she said without turning. "I've never seen the city from this angle before." I've always cleaned these windows, but I've never really stopped to look through them." Henry stood beside her, contemplating the familiar view with new eyes. "Sometimes I think I don't really see it either. I just look." Clara smiled, a genuine smile that lit up her face in a way he had never noticed before. "For someone so pragmatic, you occasionally say surprisingly poetic things, Mr. Harrison." "Henry," he corrected gently. "Please, here tonight I'm just Henry." She hesitated, as if the mere mention of his first name crossed an invisible boundary. "Henry," she repeated finally, testing the name on her lips. Something shifted in that moment, a subtle barrier crumbling between them. It wasn't physical attraction, though that was also present as an undercurrent. It was something deeper, a recognition of souls that, despite their radically different circumstances, shared a fundamental loneliness. They sat down again, this time on the living room sofa, maintaining a respectful distance between them. The conversation flowed to lighter topics: movies they had both seen, places in New York they loved, small confessions about habits and preferences. Clara revealed her love for pistachio ice cream. Henry admitted he secretly enjoyed watching old soap operas when no one was looking. They laughed together, a sound that seemed both strange and perfectly natural in that normally silent apartment. The wine had relaxed them both, bringing down their carefully constructed defenses. At some point, Henry got up to get a blanket when he noticed Clara was cold. When he returned, he sat a little closer to her, draping the soft fabric over her shoulders. "Thank you," she murmured, pulling the blanket around her. For a brief instant, their fingers brushed, and Henry felt an electric current run through him, not just desire, but a deeper connection that frightened him with its intensity. He instinctively pulled back, unaccustomed to such genuine feelings. Clara noticed his movement and also shifted away slightly. There was a blush on her cheeks that hadn't been there before, and her eyes avoided his. "Maybe we should get some rest," she suggested, her voice suddenly formal again. "It must be late." Henry agreed, though a part of him wished the night would never end. "I'll show you the guest room." He led her down the hallway, lit only by the candles they carried, creating a path of flickering light through the darkened apartment. The guest room was spacious and elegant, like the rest of the apartment, but rarely used. There was a queen-sized bed with Egyptian cotton sheets, a dark wood dresser, and an armchair in the corner. "The bathroom is through there," he indicated an adjacent door. "You should find everything you need. Clean towels, toiletries. This is more luxurious than any hotel I've ever stayed in," Clara commented with a shy smile. "If you need anything during the night, my room is at the end of the hall." He hesitated at the door. "Good night, Clara. Good night. Henry." He gently closed the door and walked to his own room, feeling strangely light and yet burdened with emotions he couldn't quite name. This simple woman had awakened something in him that he thought had been dead for years, perhaps decades, a capacity for genuine connection, to see another human being not as a means to an end, but as a whole complex, fascinating person in her own right. Henry lay down on his king-sized bed, listening to the rain that still fell outside, softer now. He thought of Clara just a few feet away, probably also awake, also thinking. Two lonely souls, separated by physical and social walls, but who for one night had found a common language. He fell asleep to the sound of the rain, and for the first time in years he didn't dream of contracts, deals, or his father's disappointed face. He dreamed of books, rain, and dark eyes that seemed to see through his carefully constructed defenses. Clara, for her part, lay in the luxurious bed, feeling out of place and yet strangely at peace. The room was larger than her entire apartment in the Bronx, a tiny space she shared with a roommate to save on rent. The sheets were softer than anything she had ever touched, the mattress seeming to embrace her tired body. She thought of Henry, not the billionaire businessman, but the man she had seen that night. A man with insecurities, painful memories, and a loneliness that mirrored her own, despite all the differences between them. There was a vulnerability in him that surprised her, a humanity hidden beneath layers of privilege and power. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to imagine a world where people like them could truly connect beyond the barriers of class and circumstance, a world where she wouldn't always be the employee and he the employer. But she quickly pushed those thoughts away. Clara was above all a realist, and the reality was that in the morning she would go back to being the cleaning lady, and he the owner of the apartment, With that pragmatic thought, she fell asleep to the sound of the diminishing rain outside, never imagining how that stormy night would change the course of her life forever. The morning arrived with a clear and surprisingly blue sky, as if the previous night's storm had been just a dream. Clara woke up disoriented for a few seconds, the luxurious surroundings unfamiliar, until the memories of the night before flooded her mind. She got up quickly, feeling vulnerable in the light of day. The intimacy that the darkness and wine had provided now seemed inappropriate under the unforgiving clarity of the morning. She dressed quickly in the same uniform from the day before, trying to look as presentable as possible under the circumstances. Before leaving the room, she made the bed with professional precision, leaving everything exactly as she had found it. To her surprise, the smell of fresh coffee permeated the apartment. Following the aroma, she found Henry in the kitchen, already dressed in slacks and an impeccably pressed white shirt, sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms. He was operating a complex Italian espresso machine with the competence of someone accustomed to making his own coffee, despite all his wealth. "Good morning," he said upon seeing her, a cautious smile on his face. "I hope you slept well." "Yes, thank you," Clara replied formally, aware that the barriers that had dissolved the night before were back in place. "The power is back, I see. Around 5 this morning. I made coffee. Would you like a cup?" "Yes, please." Henry served the coffee in fine porcelain cups and gestured to the kitchen island, where he had arranged a small breakfast, fresh bread, cheeses, fruit. Clara sat down hesitantly, feeling out of place, as if she were pretending to belong to a world that was not hers. "I checked the news. The city is a mess," he commented, sitting at a polite distance. "Several areas are still flooded, including parts of the Bronx." Clara nodded, holding the cup with both hands, enjoying the warmth emanating from the perfectly brewed coffee. "I need to check on my apartment. My area usually floods during heavy rains." "I can take you," Henry offered. "Or call a driver if you prefer." "There's no need. I can take public transport once the lines are running again." Henry watched her over the rim of his cup. In the morning light, Clara seemed different. Younger, more vulnerable, but also more determined. Her dark hair, now loose, framed a face of simple, honest beauty. There was a dignity in her posture that no company uniform could diminish. "About last night," he began. "It was just an exceptional circumstance," she completed quickly. "I appreciate your hospitality, but we don't need to turn it into something it's not." Henry felt a tightness in his chest at the ease with which she re-established the distance between them. "And what do you think it is, Clara?" She finally looked directly into his eyes without hesitation. A night where two lonely people talked during a storm. Nothing more, nothing less. There was a finality in her voice that completely disarmed him. Henry wanted to say it was more than that he had felt something awaken inside him, something he thought had been dead for years. But he also knew Clara was right. The social chasm between them was real and deep. What future could there be for a billionaire and a cleaning lady, other than romantic clichés that would inevitably end in disillusionment? "Of course," he finally agreed. "You're absolutely right." They finished breakfast in a silence heavy with unspoken words. When Clara announced she was leaving, Henry didn't insist she stay. He offered his private driver, which she politely refused, accepting only a ride from an app that he insisted on calling and paying for. "Thank you for everything," she said formally at the door, extending her hand for a professional shake. Henry took her hand, feeling its slightly rough texture, marked by hard work, so different from the soft hands of the women in his social circle. "It was a pleasure getting to know you better, Clara Vellini." For an instant, something flickered in her eyes, perhaps regret, perhaps a preemptive longing for something that would never be. But it quickly vanished, replaced by the composure that was her armor against the world. "Until Tuesday." "Mr. Harrison," she replied, reverting to the formal address, and turned to leave. Henry stood at the door, watching her enter the elevator, feeling that something precious was slipping through his fingers, something that all his money and power could neither buy nor hold. In the days that followed, Henry found himself unable to concentrate on business. The image of Clara wouldn't leave his mind, her rare, genuine smile, the intelligence in her eyes when they discussed literature, the quiet strength that emanated from her every gesture. He tried to convince himself it was just a passing attraction, perhaps even a cliché. The rich man, fascinated by the simple woman. But he knew it was deeper. Clara, for her part, returned to her small apartment in the Bronx, which had thankfully been spared the worst of the flooding. Her routine continued as always, waking at 5 in the morning, taking 2 buses to get to work, cleaning the apartments and offices of people whose lives were completely different from hers, returning home exhausted. But something had changed within her. The night in Henry Harrison's penthouse had opened a door she thought permanently closed. The possibility of genuine connection, of being seen and understood by another person. When Tuesday arrived, they both felt a growing anxiety. Clara considered asking to be transferred to another client, but she knew it would raise questions she didn't want to answer. Henry thought about not being home during her shift as he used to, but the thought of not seeing her was unbearable. When they finally met, it was as if the storm had never happened. Clara greeted him formally and continued her work with her usual efficiency. Henry responded with the same formality, taking refuge in his office while she cleaned the rest of the apartment. But there was a tension in the air, a mutual awareness that neither of them could completely deny. Small glances, hesitations, and excessive care not to get too close. It was like a silent dance around a feeling neither was prepared to name. It was during this emotional stalemate that fate or misfortune intervened. Clara was organizing a drawer in the library when she found a yellowed envelope hidden beneath a pile of old documents. Normally she wouldn't touch personal papers, but the envelope had fallen to the floor when she removed the stack to clean. As she picked it up, a name on the outside caught her eye, Ademar Vellini. Her heart raced. Vellini was not a common surname in the United States. Ademar was her father's name, a man she had never known personally, but whom her mother sometimes spoke of. A man who had worked for a large tech company and been unjustly fired, according to the few stories Clara had heard. A man who had disappeared from their lives, leaving her mother to raise a daughter alone. A man who, according to her mother, had died years later, embittered and broken after a mysterious lawsuit against his former employers. With trembling hands, Clara opened the envelope. Inside, she found an old typewritten letter and a black-and-white photo of a man in his 30s, a man with her same dark, expressive eyes. The letter was a desperate plea. Ademar Vellini was begging Augustus Harrison, Henry's father, to drop the charges against him. He repeatedly asserted his innocence, explained that he had been used as a scapegoat in a corporate fraud scheme, and pleaded for justice in the name of his pregnant wife and his reputation. Clara felt the world spin around her. The company her father had worked for, the company that had destroyed him, was the very one that would eventually become Henry Harrison's empire. The injustice that had shaped her childhood of poverty and abandonment had a name and an address, and she had been cleaning the bathrooms of that address for months. Clara. "Is everything all right?" Henry's voice snapped her out of her trance. He was standing in the library doorway, watching her with concern. Clara realized she must be pale, her fingers still clutching the letter as if it were a death sentence. "What is that?" he asked, approaching. Wordlessly, she held out the letter. Henry took it, confused, and began to read. Clara watched as his expression slowly changed, first confusion, then recognition, finally a silent horror that drained the color from his face. "Ademar Vellini," he murmured, looking from the letter to Clara. "Your father?" She nodded, unable to form words. The connection between them, so fragile and newly discovered, now seemed stained by a history of injustice and pain that preceded them. Henry stammered, a man normally so articulate suddenly at a loss for words. "Clara, I didn't know. I was young when this happened." "My father? Your father destroyed mine," Clara finally managed to say, her voice surprisingly steady. "And your company built its fortune on that injustice." It wasn't that simple, Henry tried to explain, though he knew no explanation could erase what was written in that letter. "There was a fraud scheme, yes, but I only found out years later that my father had manipulated evidence to protect the company. Ademar was used as a scapegoat, you're right, but by the time I learned the truth, he had already died," Clara completed. "Died after years of trying to clear his name, while my mother worked 3 jobs to support me, until the exhaustion killed her too." The words hung between them like an invisible, insurmountable wall. All the warmth, all the intimacy they had built during the stormy night now seemed like a cruel twist of fate. "Clara, please." Henry took a step toward her, but she recoiled. "Don't touch me," she whispered, her voice trembling with restrained emotion. "I have to leave. We can talk about this. I can explain what happened. I can try to fix it?" She laughed, a bitter sound Henry had never heard from her before. "Some things can't be fixed, Mr. Harrison. Some injustices are permanent." Without waiting for a reply, Clara put the letter and photograph in her pocket, grabbed her supply case and walked quickly to the exit. Henry followed, desperate to explain, to somehow prevent this discovery from destroying the connection they had begun to build. "Clara, wait. It wasn't my fault. I was just a kid when it happened. When I found out the truth years later, I tried to compensate the affected families, but I never found yours. I never knew Adama had a daughter." She stopped at the door, turning to face him one last time. Her eyes were dry, but there was a pain in them that tears could not express. "My father died trying to prove his innocence. My mother died working to make up for the injustice your family committed. And I grew up in shelters, believing I didn't deserve anything better, that I would never belong anywhere." Her voice was low, controlled, but each word carried the weight of a lifetime of struggle. "And all that time, people like you accumulated more and more, building empires on the suffering of people like us." "I am not my father," Henry argued, feeling helpless in the face of her pain. "No," Clara agreed, "you're not. But you live off the fruits of the tree he planted with someone else's blood." With those words, she left, leaving Henry standing in the foyer, holding a truth he had always known but never had to confront so directly, that his fortune, his empire, his life of privilege, had all been built, at least in part, on injustices like the one that had destroyed Clara's family. That night, Henry couldn't sleep. The image of Clara leaving his apartment, carrying not only the pain of her own history, but also the weight of the connection between their lives that now seemed both inevitable and impossible, haunted him. For the first time in years he cried, not out of self-pity, but from a genuine guilt he did not know how to expiate. Clara also spent a sleepless night, sitting in her small apartment, looking at the photo of the father she had never known. There was so much pain, so much anger accumulated over the years, and now, in a cruel cosmic joke, fate had made her fall for the son of the man who had destroyed her family. Because that's what had happened, she finally admitted to herself. During that stormy night, she had begun to fall for Henry Harrison. Not the billionaire, but the vulnerable, lonely man behind the facade of power. And now that nascent feeling was inextricably intertwined with a history of injustice that preceded them. 2 days later, Clara sent a formal email to the cleaning company, requesting a transfer to other clients. She cited professional incompatibility as the reason without going into detail. Management, fearing the loss of an important client like Henry Harrison, tried to dissuade her, but Clara was adamant. Henry, for his part, tried to contact her several times, first through the company, then by trying to find her personal address. But Clara had erected walls around herself, walls built from years of experience protecting herself from disappointment. And so, what could have been the beginning of a love story became a painful separation, marked by secrets from the past that had emerged to haunt the present. Two souls who, for one night, had found comfort in each other, were now further apart than ever, separated not only by social chasms, but by a family history of pain and injustice that seemed impossible to overcome. However, the fate that had so improbably brought them together was not content to keep them apart. The story of Henry and Clara was just beginning, and the secrets revealed would be only the first of many obstacles they would have to face if they were to find their way back to each other. 3 weeks had passed since Clara discovered the truth about the connection between her family and Henry's. 3 weeks in which she had tried to move on, focusing on her work, her nightly reading, the routine that had always been her refuge. But something had changed within her, a restlessness she couldn't name, a void that books no longer filled. The cleaning company had granted her transfer request, albeit reluctantly. Clara now cleaned corporate offices in the financial district, anonymous, impersonal places where no one noticed her presence beyond checking if the desks were properly polished and the trash cans emptied. That Thursday morning, as she waited at the bus stop under a fine, persistent drizzle so characteristic of a New York winter, Clara was stunned by the newspaper headline a man next to her was reading, "Heir to Harrison Empire steps down as CEO, announces foundation for social reparation." Her heart raced. Unable to contain her curiosity, she bought a copy from a nearby newsstand and, shielding it from the rain, read the full article inside the crowded bus. Henry Harrison had resigned as CEO of Harrison Technologies, retaining only a minority stake as a shareholder. In a statement that shocked the financial market, he announced the creation of the Renewal Foundation, an initiative with an initial fund of $200 million dedicated to social projects, and more surprisingly, to repairing damages caused by the corporation's past unethical business practices. What caught Clara's attention most, however, was the name of the foundation's first program. The Ademar Vellini Project, described as a specific initiative to identify and compensate families harmed by a historic case of corporate injustice that occurred in the company's early years. Clara felt her hands tremble as she held the newspaper. The words blurred before her eyes, not from the rain that occasionally spattered through the bus's open window, but from the tears that threatened to fall. It was impossible not to see the gesture for what it truly was, an attempt by Henry to fix what his father had broken, to clean a stain on his family's past and perhaps somehow to build a bridge across the chasm that separated them. Henry, for his part, was going through his own emotional turmoil. The decision to step away from the company's presidency hadn't been easy. But after the revelation about Clara's father, he realized he could no longer ignore the ghosts of the past. For years, he had suspected irregularities committed by his father in the building of the family empire, but he had never had the courage to investigate thoroughly. It was more comfortable not to know, to continue accumulating wealth without questioning its origin. Ademar Vellini's letter and Clara's face upon discovering the truth had broken something inside him. For the first time, he clearly saw the human price of success at any cost. The ruined lives, the shattered families, the real suffering behind the collateral damage that executives like his father and later himself considered merely unavoidable statistics in corporate power games. "Are you sure about this, Henry?" asked Rafael Mendez, his longtime lawyer and only true friend, as they signed the documents officially establishing the foundation. "The board is in an uproar. The shareholders are threatening lawsuits. You're opening a Pandora's box with this reparations program." Henry looked out the window of his office, no longer the presidential suite at the top of the Harrison Technologies building, but a smaller, more sober space, rented specifically to house the new foundation. "I'm sure, Raphael. For the first time in my life, I'm doing something that actually matters." Raphael sighed, adjusting his thin-rimmed glasses. "It's because of her, isn't it?" "The cleaning lady?" Henry didn't answer immediately. How could he explain that Clara had been merely the catalyst, the spark that had illuminated a darkness that had always existed within him? How could he describe the transformation that had occurred since that stormy night, when he saw reflected in her eyes not the powerful magnate everyone feared, but just a man, lonely, incomplete, searching for something no amount of money could buy? "It's about doing what's right," he finally replied, "even if it's too late." That same evening, as Clara was preparing a simple dinner in her small apartment, she heard a knock on the door. It was unusual to have visitors, especially at that hour. Cautiously, she approached the door. "Who is it?" she asked. "Henry Harrison." His voice hit her like an electric shock. For a moment, she considered pretending she wasn't home. But she knew he wouldn't give up easily, not after creating an entire foundation in her father's name. Taking a deep breath, she unlocked the door. Henry stood there, not in the impeccable suit he used to wear, but in dark jeans and a grey sweater. He looked thinner, with visible dark circles under his green eyes. In his hand he held an envelope. "How did you find me?" was Clara's first question, keeping the door partially closed. "I hired an investigator," he answered honestly. "I know that sounds invasive, but I needed to talk to you." Clara hesitated, torn between residual anger and a curiosity she couldn't completely suppress. Finally, she opened the door wider. 5 minutes, she conceded. The apartment was tiny compared to Henry's luxurious penthouse. Just a small living room integrated with a kitchen, one bedroom and a bathroom. But there was something welcoming about the space. Makeshift shelves filled with books, a few plants on the windowsill, a colorful blanket on the worn-out sofa. It was a place that was lived in, not just inhabited. "I saw the news in the paper," Clara said, breaking the tense silence, "about the foundation." Henry nodded, still standing, respecting her space. "It's not just a symbolic gesture. I'm truly committed to finding all the families harmed by my father's schemes and offering reparation." "You can't repair everything," she replied, crossing her arms. "My father died of cirrhosis at 42, after years of drinking to forget his ruined career. My mother died of exhaustion at 37, after years of working 3 jobs to support me alone. There's no check big enough to compensate for that." The harshness in Clara's words was counterbalanced by a fragility in her eyes that Henry knew well, the same vulnerability he had seen during the stormy night, when she had finally let her defenses down. "You're right," he agreed, without trying to defend himself. "There's no way to erase the past. But maybe we can create a different future." He held out the envelope to her. Clara took it hesitantly. "What is this?" "All the information I could gather about your father. Confidential internal reports, statements from former employees, documents that prove his innocence. It's enough to clear his name publicly, even if posthumously." Clara looked at the envelope, feeling the weight of what it contained, not just papers, but the possibility of closure for a wound she had carried her entire life. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper. Henry took a step toward her, still maintaining a respectful distance. "Because it's the right thing to do." "And because—" he hesitated, searching for the right words. "Because I've never felt for anyone what I felt that night, Clara. The connection we had, it was real. At least for me." The vulnerability in his voice disarmed her. For weeks, Clara had convinced herself that what she had felt for Henry was just an illusion, a moment of weakness during a night of isolation and storm. But seeing him there, stripped of all the power and arrogance that had once defined him, just a man trying to right the wrongs of the past, made the walls she had built begin to crumble. "I don't know if I can separate you from what your family did to mine," she admitted, with painful honesty. "I understand," Henry replied. "I'm not asking for forgiveness or a second chance. I just wanted you to know that I'm trying to be a better person, and that regardless of what happens between us, your father will have justice." Something in the simplicity of his statement touched Clara deeply. There was no manipulation there, no attempt to buy her affection with grand gestures, just a man facing the consequences of a past that was not directly his, but for which he was taking responsibility. "My 5 minutes are up," he said with a faint, sad smile, walking toward the door. "Thank you for hearing me out, Clara." When the door closed behind him, Clara remained motionless, holding the envelope to her chest. Through the window, she watched Henry get into a simple car, not the Aston Martin he used to drive. Even in that small detail, she could see the change in the man she had known. That night, she spent hours reading the documents he had brought, internal company reports detailing how her father had been used as a scapegoat to protect high-level executives, including Augustus Harrison. Statements from colleagues attesting to his integrity. Concrete proof that Ademar Vellini had been not only innocent, but also the victim of a deliberate campaign to destroy his reputation when he threatened to expose the scheme. The tears Clara had held back for years finally came, not just from the pain of injustice, but also from the relief of finally knowing the full truth. Her father had not been a failure who abandoned his family, as some had whispered in the shelters she had passed through. He had been an honest man, destroyed by a corrupt system. A week passed. Henry did not try to contact her again, respecting the space Clara clearly needed. He threw himself into the Foundation's work, personally investigating other cases similar to Ademar Vellini's, facing fierce resistance from the company's board of directors and the skepticism of the specialized press, who saw his sudden change as some kind of marketing strategy or midlife crisis. It was during a press conference about the Foundation, when a particularly cynical journalist questioned his true motives, that Henry saw her. Clara was at the back of the room, almost hidden among the reporters, wearing not her cleaning company uniform but a simple blouse and jeans. Their eyes met briefly and something silent was communicated, A truce, perhaps, or the beginning of an understanding. My motives? Henry repeated the journalist's question without completely breaking his gaze from Clara. Let's just say I've learned there's a difference between success and meaning. I built an empire, but in the process, I lost something essential, the ability to genuinely connect with other human beings, to see beyond transactions and social hierarchies. I'm trying to get that back. After the conference, Henry looked for Clara in the dispersing crowd, but she had disappeared. He felt a pang of disappointment, though he knew her mere presence was a sign that perhaps there was hope for them. 2 days later, while reviewing documents in his new office, he received an unexpected visitor. Clara was in the reception area asking to see him. When she entered, she was carrying a folder. I thought this might interest your foundation, she said, holding out the documents. They're letters I found among my mother's things, correspondence between my father and other employees who were also wronged. Henry accepted the folder, understanding the significance of the gesture. Clara wasn't just handing over useful information, she was, in her own way, extending a hand, offering a chance to rebuild. Thank you, he said simply. This will help a lot. Clara nodded, hesitating at the door as if she wanted to say something more. Finally, she gathered her courage. You've changed, she observed. Not just on the outside. There's something different in your eyes. Henry smiled faintly. Let's just say I had an epiphany during a thunderstorm. The ghost of a smile crossed her lips. I'm teaching a literature class twice a week at a community center in the Bronx, she commented, seemingly changing the subject. For kids and teenagers who, like me, don't have many opportunities. Your foundation could, maybe, help? Henry completed, feeling a surge of hope. It would be an honor. I don't want charity, Clara clarified quickly. Just resources for books, maybe a better space. It wouldn't be charity, he assured her. It would be a partnership. The word hung between them, loaded with meaning beyond its immediate context. Partnership, a relationship between equals, despite all circumstantial differences. I'll think about it, Clara replied, but there was a softness in her voice that hadn't been there before. I have to go now. Henry wanted to ask her to stay to have a coffee, to continue the conversation that had barely begun. But he knew he had to respect her pace. Clara had spent her life being pushed around by circumstances. Now she deserved to be the one to determine the next steps. Thank you for coming, he said simply, and for trusting me enough to share this. When she left, Henry felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time, genuine hope, not just for the possibility of personal redemption, but for a future where he and Clara could find common ground, despite everything that separated them. In the following weeks, an unexpected routine was established. Clara continued her work with the cleaning company, but now she also dedicated more time to the small literature project at the community center. Henry, in turn, made the Ademar Vellini project the flagship of his foundation, working tirelessly to identify and compensate other families harmed by the company's past unethical practices. Their paths crossed regularly, sometimes at the community center, where Henry began to appear discreetly with donations of books, other times at the foundation's headquarters, where Clara occasionally brought more information or contacts that could help the investigation. Each meeting was marked by a cautious cordiality, like two people walking on thin ice, testing its strength before each step. It was during one of these meetings, while discussing the expansion of the literature project to other community centers, that something shifted. They were sitting in a simple cafe in Clara's neighborhood, neutral territory, far from both the ostentatious luxury of Henry's world and the precariousness he feared would embarrass her in the Bronx. Why literature? Henry asked, genuinely curious. Of all the things you could teach. Clara swirled the coffee cup between her hands, thoughtful. Because books were my first and only window to other worlds. In the shelters, in the foster homes, I had nothing that was truly my own except the stories I read. They showed me that there was life beyond the limitations the world had imposed on me. The passion in her voice when she spoke of literature always fascinated him. It was as if another Clara emerged, more open, more vibrant, freed from the shackles of constant caution. You should have had the chance to study at the university, Henry commented. To become a formal teacher, Clara shrugged. Maybe one day. For now, I do what I can with what I have. It was this resilience, this ability to find paths where others would only see walls, that impressed Henry the most. While he had grown up believing that money and power were the only metrics of success, Clara had built a meaningful life from almost nothing. "I'm organizing an official launch event for the foundation," he commented, slightly changing the subject. "I'd like you to be there, not as just any guest, but as a consultant for the project that bears your father's name." Clara raised her eyebrows, surprised. "Do you know what that would mean? A former cleaning lady next to the heir of the Harrison Empire at a corporate event? The sharks on Wall Street would have a collective meltdown." Henry smiled, a genuine smile he rarely showed in public. "That's exactly why I want you there. It's time to shake things up." There was something contagious about his enthusiasm, an energy Clara couldn't completely ignore. She realized that little by little, she was beginning to see Henry not as the son of the man who had destroyed her family, but as someone genuinely committed to building something new, something better. "I'll think about it," she replied, though they both knew she would probably accept. When they parted that afternoon, there was a moment, brief, almost imperceptible, when their hands touched. It wasn't a planned gesture, just an accident as they both reached for the bill at the same time. But the contact, however fleeting, sent a wave of warmth through them both, a physical reminder of the connection they had begun to build during that stormy night and that, despite all obstacles, refused to completely disappear. The launch event for the Renewal Foundation was held in a cultural space in downtown New York, not in a five-star hotel or an exclusive ballroom, as one might expect from the heir to the Harrison Empire, but in an accessible venue, surrounded by public transport, with a more inclusive atmosphere. Clara arrived early, feeling strangely nervous. She had chosen a simple dark blue dress, nothing extravagant but elegant enough for the occasion. Her hair, usually tied in a severe bun for work, fell loosely over her shoulders in natural waves. Henry saw her immediately, despite the crowd that was already forming. Something in his chest tightened as he watched her, not just for her understated beauty, but for the courage she showed by being there, facing a world that had always excluded her. "You came," he said as he approached, his voice betraying more emotion than he intended. "I promised I'd think about it," she replied with a small smile. "And here I am." The ceremony was simple but impactful. Henry spoke openly about the company's past mistakes, about the responsibility he felt to repair the damage caused by unethical practices, about the need for a new business model that considered human impact, not just financial profit. When he introduced the Adama Vellini project, he invited Clara to the stage. She went up hesitantly, unaccustomed to being the center of attention. But when she began to speak about her father, a man she had never known, but whose legacy of integrity could now finally be restored, her voice gained strength and confidence. "My father was just one of many victims of a system that values profit over human life," she declared, looking directly at the audience of business leaders, journalists and public figures. "But his story does not end in defeat. Through this foundation, his name now represents hope and change for other families who, like mine, have suffered similar injustices." When she finished speaking, the silence in the room was broken by applause, hesitant at first, then growing in intensity. Henry watched, marveling at the transformation before his eyes. Clara had always possessed an impressive inner strength, but seeing her occupy that space with such dignity, claiming the place that had always been denied her, awakened an even deeper admiration in him. After the official ceremony, as guests circulated with glasses of champagne and small canapes, Clara found herself surrounded by journalists curious about her story. She responded with her usual economy of words, refusing to turn her family's tragedy into a media spectacle. Later, as the crowd began to thin, Henry found her on an attached terrace, looking out at the city lights. "You were incredible in there," he commented, approaching. "I just told the truth," she replied, still gazing at the urban landscape. "The truth can be revolutionary when spoken by those who are normally silenced." Clara smiled, a more open smile than any he had ever seen on her face. "That was almost poetic, Henry Harrison." He laughed, leaning against the railing beside her, close enough to feel the warmth of her body, but still respecting her personal space. "I have my moments." They stood in silence for a few moments, sharing the panorama of New York City, the city of extreme contrasts that had somehow brought them together, against all odds. "Your life has changed a lot in the last few weeks," Clara observed. "For the better," he replied without hesitation. "For the first time, I feel like I'm doing something that matters, something that goes beyond just accumulating more zeros in a bank account." "And the board? The shareholders? They must be furious with your decisions." Henry shrugged. "They are. They tried to oust me completely, but I still have enough shares to block certain maneuvers. Anyway, I don't care anymore. There are things more valuable than corporate power." Clara turned to face him, studying his face as if trying to decipher a particularly complex text. "You really have changed. Thanks to you," he said simply. "No, Henry, you changed because you chose to change. I was just the catalyst." There was a wisdom in her words that touched him deeply. Clara had always been able to see through the superficial layers, to perceive essential truths that others, including himself, often ignored. "Clara," he began, unsure how to express everything he was feeling. "I know there's a complicated history between our families. I know it might be impossible to completely overcome the past. But that night during the storm, what we felt, it was real, at least for me." She didn't answer immediately, and Henry felt his heart race in the silence. Finally, Clara reached out, her hand lightly touching his on the railing. "For me too," she admitted in a low voice. "But I'm afraid of what? Of everything. The differences between us. What people will say. Of losing myself in your world. Of discovering that what we felt was just an illusion created by extraordinary circumstances." Henry turned his palm up, intertwining his fingers with hers, the first intentional touch between them since that stormy night. "What if we could build a new world? Not mine, not yours. Something different?" The proposal hung between them like a promise, fragile and powerful at the same time. Clara looked at their joined hands, so different in appearance, hers marked by hard work, his preserved by privilege, but both now united in a touch that transcended all the social barriers that separated them. "One step at a time," she finally replied. It wasn't a definitive yes, but it wasn't a refusal either. It was an opening, a possibility. For Henry, that was enough. After a lifetime of calculating risks and outcomes, he had finally learned to value the process, not just the final destination. "One step at a time," he agreed, gently squeezing her hand. In the months that followed, Henry and Clara's relationship evolved gradually, like a delicate plant that needs time and care to blossom. They continued to work together at the foundation, she as the official consultant for the project bearing her father's name, he as the executive director, increasingly distant from the traditional corporate world. Clara's literature project at the community center expanded, becoming a model program that would soon be replicated in other underserved communities in the city. With resources from the foundation, she managed to create a small library on site, fulfilling a dream she had carried since her days as an assistant in the public library. Henry, in turn, discovered an unexpected calling in social work. The man who once measured success only in profits and acquisitions now found genuine satisfaction in seeing the direct impact of his projects on people's lives. The ruthless enforcer who terrified executives in boardrooms transformed into an attentive listener, genuinely interested in the stories and needs of those he had once considered invisible. Their personal lives also intertwined in ways neither could have predicted. Simple dinners in neighborhood restaurants, walks through Central Park on Sundays, nights sharing books and conversations in spaces that belonged exclusively neither to his world nor to hers. Clara continued to live in her small apartment in the Bronx, refusing Henry's offers to help her find a more comfortable place. Her independence was non-negotiable, and he had learned to respect that. The first kiss happened almost 3 months after the Foundation's launch event. They were in the community library they had built together, organizing a new shipment of books that had arrived that afternoon. Clara was on top of a small ladder, reaching for the highest shelf when she slipped. Henry instinctively caught her, their bodies suddenly close, her scent of lavender intoxicating his senses. They looked at each other for a long moment, and then, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, their lips met, a soft, hesitant kiss at first, then deeper, carrying all the tension and desire that had been contained for months. "This is going to complicate things," Clara murmured when they finally separated, still in his arms. "Life is already complicated," Henry replied. "At least now we have a good reason to face the complications." She smiled against his lips, allowing herself, perhaps for the first time in her life, to believe that she deserved something good, something real, something that surpassed all the limitations the world had imposed on her. The news of their relationship eventually leaked to the press. It was inevitable, given Henry's profile. The tabloids had a field day with the story, "Billionaire trades empire for cleaning lady. Unlikely romance shakes New York elite." From maid to first lady of philanthropy, Clara faced the curious stares, the whispers, the malicious insinuations that she was an opportunist, with the same quiet dignity that had always characterized her life. "Don't listen to them," Henry would say, furious at the media's treatment of Clara. "They're vultures looking for a carcass. I'm used to being judged," she would reply with a calmness that impressed him. "I've spent my whole life being seen as less because of where I was born, what I do for a living. The difference is that now I know exactly who I am and what I'm worth. Their headlines can't diminish me." It was this inner strength, this unwavering self-confidence, born from years of adversity, that made Henry fall more and more in love with her. Clara taught him daily that true resilience wasn't about building walls to protect oneself from the world, but about remaining whole despite all the world's attempts to break you. One Sunday afternoon, 6 months after their relationship officially began, Henry invited Clara to see a special place. He drove himself, still the Aston Martin, one of the few indulgences he had kept from his former life, out of the city, heading north for about an hour. "Where are we going?" she asked, intrigued. "A surprise," he replied, an enigmatic smile on his lips. They turned onto a secondary road that snaked through mountains covered in preserved forest. The air grew cleaner, the landscape greener and more lush as they moved away from the pollution of New York City. Finally, they arrived at a simple wooden gate. Beyond the gate, a short dirt road led to a house, not an ostentatious mansion as Clara might have expected, but a rustic and welcoming structure made of stone and wood, perfectly integrated into the natural surroundings. There was a garden with aromatic herbs and wildflowers, a wide porch with hammocks and rocking chairs, and a breathtaking view of the valley below. "What is this place?" Clara asked, amazed by the simple, authentic beauty of the property. "I bought it a few weeks ago," Henry explained, watching her reaction closely. "It's a restored old farmhouse, far enough from the city to have peace, close enough not to be isolated." They went inside. The interior was as welcoming as the exterior. Hardwood floors, rustic but comfortable furniture, a stone fireplace in the main room. What caught Clara's attention most, however, was the library, an entire room with floor-to-ceiling shelves already partially filled with books. "Henry," she murmured, touching the spines of the volumes with the same reverent care he had noticed that first day, when he had secretly watched her in his apartment. "It's beautiful." He came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her, resting his chin on her shoulder. "I thought it could be a new beginning, a place that's neither my world nor yours, but something we can build together, without the weight of the past, without the expectations of others." Clara turned in his arms, looking directly into his eyes. "Are you asking me to move in with you?" "I'm asking for more than that," Henry replied, suddenly as nervous as a teenager. "I'm asking you to build a life with me, the way we want to, not the way the world expects." She was silent for a moment, absorbing the full meaning of his proposal. It wasn't just an invitation to share a physical space, but a proposition to completely redefine what they could be, together and individually. "And your work? The foundation? Everything is in New York. We can go back and forth. Work remotely when possible. The foundation will still be a priority, but I want more from life than just work. I want peace. I want meaning. I want to wake up next to you and fall asleep to the sound of your breathing." The unexpected poetry in his words brought tears to Clara's eyes, not tears of sadness, but of a kind of happiness she never believed she could experience. "Yes," she replied simply, resting her forehead against his. "Let's build something new together." That night, they made love for the first time, not in the master bedroom with its king-sized bed, but on a soft rug in front of the lit fireplace, as if consecrating the space that would be the center of their new life. It was gentle and intense simultaneously, a meeting of souls as much as of bodies. Clara, who had never fully given herself to anyone, found in Henry not just a lover, but a partner who saw all of her scars, her strengths, her vulnerabilities. Afterward, lying on the rug, covered only by a blanket and the flickering glow of the fire, they talked about the future, not with rigid plans and expectations, but with open possibilities, shared dreams, whispered desires. "I want to go back to school," Clara confided. "Finish that literature degree I was never able to start." "You'll be the most brilliant professor Columbia has ever seen," Henry replied, kissing her forehead. "And I want to expand the project in the communities, create more libraries, more safe spaces, where kids like me can discover worlds beyond their circumstances. We'll do it together. The foundation can be the vehicle, but the vision will be yours." She traced the outline of his face with her fingertips, as if wanting to memorize every line, every angle. "And you? What do you want, besides the work at the foundation?" Henry reflected for a moment. "I want to learn how to grow things, to make things with my own hands, to measure success not by what I own, but by the good I do." He hesitated, then added in a lower voice, "And maybe, one day, if you want to, start a family." Clara didn't answer immediately, and Henry feared he had gone too far, touched on a subject too delicate for this stage of their relationship. But then she smiled, a radiant smile that lit up her entire face. "I'd like that," she admitted. "Not now, but someday. To give a child everything I never had, not in material terms, but in stability, security, unconditional love." He pulled her closer, feeling a wave of gratitude so intense it almost suffocated him. In a few short months, this extraordinary woman had transformed his life in ways he had never imagined possible. From a cold, isolated executive to a man capable of dreaming, of feeling, of loving deeply. "I love you." "Clara Vellini," he said for the first time, the words coming naturally, effortlessly. "I love you." "Henry Harrison," she replied, and there was no hesitation in her voice. 3 months later, they officially moved to the house in the country. Clara didn't completely abandon her small apartment in the Bronx. She turned it into a community reading space for neighborhood children. Supervised by volunteers from the project, she now coordinated through the foundation. Henry kept a smaller apartment in New York for the days they needed to be in the city for professional commitments, but the country house became their true home. There, away from the spotlight, from social expectations, from the rigid structures that had defined their previous lives, they found a balance few believed was possible. Mornings began with coffee on the porch, watching the sunrise over the mountains. During the day, they each devoted themselves to their projects, Clara dividing her time between her studies, finally enrolled in the literature program she had always dreamed of, and coordinating the community library program. Henry managing the foundation remotely, and to everyone's surprise, learning to cultivate an organic garden on the property. Evenings were for shared readings, deep conversations, unhurried lovemaking. On weekends, they hosted friends, from both Henry's old circle and the community where Clara had grown up. It was an unlikely mix of people, but somehow it worked, building bridges between worlds that rarely met in other contexts. A year after moving to the country, on a Saturday afternoon while organizing books in the house's library, now completely filled with volumes reflecting both their tastes and interests, Clara shared news that would change their lives once. "I'm pregnant," she said simply, watching his reaction closely. Henry froze, the book he was holding slipping from his fingers. "Pregnant?" he repeated, as if he needed to hear the word again to fully grasp its meaning. Clara nodded, a shy smile on her lips. 2 months. I confirmed it yesterday." In an instant he was beside her, wrapping her in a gentle but intense hug, tears of joy forming in his eyes. "A baby," he murmured into her hair. "Our baby." "Yes," she replied, finally allowing herself to believe in the reality of a happiness that had always seemed destined for other people, never for her. A new life, a new beginning. 7 months later, on a summer evening, Maria Clara was born, a girl with her mother's dark eyes and her father's determined chin. Her name was a tribute to both Clara and Henry's mother, Mary Helen, creating a symbolic bridge between past and future. as they held her for the first time, together on the porch of their country house. Watching the first stars appear in the sky, Henry whispered, "She will never know what it's like to feel invisible, or less important, or unworthy." Clara kissed her daughter's forehead, then the lips of the man who had transformed her life as much as she had transformed his. "She will know that she comes from two different worlds that found a way to become one, and that it doesn't matter where or how we start, but the choices we make along the journey." Henry smiled, holding the two women who were now the center of his universe. "And above all, she will know what it is to be loved unconditionally." Clara nodded, looking at her sleeping daughter in her arms. "That's all that really matters." The sun began to set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The gentle breeze carried the scent of the flowers from the garden Henry cultivated with such care. Inside the house, in the library, the books they both loved waited to be discovered by the new generation that was now beginning. And so, in the twilight of that summer day, two people whom fate had brought together in the most unlikely way contemplated the miracle of their own story, a journey that had begun with a storm, crossed chasms of social class and past grievances, and culminated in this perfect moment of peace and belonging. Clara Vellini, the girl who had grown up believing she didn't deserve happiness, now held in her arms the living proof that true love knows no social barriers. Henry Harrison, the man who had built an empire at the cost of his own humanity, had discovered that true power lies in the ability to connect, to change, to love without reservation. "You know what's funny?" Clara commented softly, as the last rays of sun illuminated their faces. "It all started with a uniform." Henry smiled, remembering that first stormy night when he had asked her to take off her uniform, not as an erotic gesture, but from a genuine desire to see all of her, beyond the layers society imposed. "And now, look at us," he replied, kissing her gently, "completely stripped of everything but what truly matters." Clara rested her head on his shoulder, feeling a peace she had never thought possible, completely free to be who we really are. And as the first stars shone in the sky above them, the unlikely couple and their newborn daughter remained on the porch embraced, living witnesses that even the deepest